Please watch this video. If you watch no other videos by me, please make it this one and the previous ones that pertain to this topic. I'm just going to jump straight back into what I was talking about with my scientific proposals. Forgive me if I sound a little dreary. It's been a very long day. And, well, the last video I recorded earlier in the afternoon. It's now closer to 2 in the morning. I believe that's what the alarm there was. So, let's just get back into it. The ripple perspective. Philosophy, ethics/epistemology. Note, this proposed hypothesis serves moreover as a thought experiment for ethical dilemmas. I submit the following conclusion: an effective method for any individual at analyzing the potentialities of how a self-induced cognizant decision of theirs is to oh, that's a lot of typos. How a self-induced cognizant decision of theirs can impact the external and internal forces around them, is to view every decision they make to some cognitive degree as an outwardly projected ripple effect of reactions to the choice they make, starting from oneself, then expanding into immediate first-hand interpersonal reactions, then to immediate secondary interpersonal reactions, then to external first-hand societal reactions, then to external secondary societal reactions, then finally to a sector of external society that I'm calling the outer's perspective. Okay, so this one I have another diagram for. It's pretty simple. Basically, this one just, again, it serves as more of a thought experiment to help you better orient your decision making in terms of your morality. And if the camera can actually see it properly. Give you a minute to just pause that and look it over. Alright, so I'll hold it down here. So with this thought experiment, in terms of your decision making and choices, your morality, what you deem to be ethically right or wrong, and a choice you make oriented around that belief, well, this serves as a mental guide, I guess I'll say, as to what could potentially be the outcomes of your choice. And even if not, this is also, I feel, just how, in essence, all choices that someone makes affect their interpersonal world and the external world outside of it. So, zoom in a bit here. You have your choice, your moral choice, what you decide to do. Then it can, well, the lines here don't really have any significance, but you can take it as, I didn't have any significance when I was drawing them, but you can take it as your choice having a varied effect on each level of, well, each ripple, basically. Each level of, outward expansion. So first, well, I'm calling them ripples because this ripple perspective is based off the ripple effect. This is the first ripple here, outside of your own personal choice. This is the immediate first-hand reactions from your interpersonal life. So it's basically how your choice affects people like, say, your family unit, family members, your peer friend group, your family friends, extended family, just people you are on the daily acquainted with, is the first ripple here, and how it affects them, what your choice actually does, how it affects their lives as well. Then here, going out to the second ripple, it's immediate secondary reactions of still the interpersonal life. This ripple would more so be loose acquaintances that you have, co-workers at your employment that you're not very close with, but you still have some sort of routine connection to, people within, say, maybe around your local neighborhood or your community that you know, but you're, again, more so just loosely acquainted with. You're not entirely very closely knit relationship-wise to them. And this is how your choice actively affects someone like that within the second ripple. Then you get to the third ripple here, which is, this is the start of the societal factors. It's the external first-hand reactions. So this ripple, at least the way I would think of it, is how your choice affects people who are not within, don't have really any direct relation to you in the slightest, but how your choice affects them first out of the rest of external societal factors. They're the first to actually have some sort of be affected in some way by your initial choice here, what you chose to actually enact, and, well, how it played out through manifesting in all of these to get to the third ripple here. And they're basically just the first ones to have a involvement with it in some form on the external level. Anyone who witnesses what you did, or well, if your choice reached them, even if, like, say you didn't know them but you were in close proximity to them at the time of your choice, how it, well, affects them in that sense. Then getting out to the, losing count, 2, 3, 4, fourth ripple here, again, societal. This is the external secondary reactions. So this comes after people who initially, on the external level, the ones who initially are impacted by your choice. This sector is basically those impacted by the first-hand reactions that weren't the first to experience the after effects of your choice, but basically still are affected because this ripple here is what caused any reactions within the, well, fourth ripple. So it's culminated from your initial choice. And then getting out to the fifth ripple, which is the most interesting in my opinion, what I'm calling, as I said, the outer's perspective. This is also societal, and this one is basically anyone on an external level, far from your interpersonal life, that has no immediate direct connection to you whatsoever, or even any real direct connection at all to the external, to other external factors in society, but they, through some form of, well, trickling down of information over long periods of time, in the smallest possible way, they hear about, or in some way are, I guess I'll say, metaphysically affected by your choice here. That, and it's far down the line. Like, say if someone off the cuff was in conversation with another person and they brought up topic about how they heard about a certain event that was caused on this level by your choice of the external secondary reactions, how yours affected down the line the fourth ripple. And that's being, in the fifth ripple, it's being relayed to this other individual who would be counted as the outer's perspective. It's being relayed to them just in casual conversation. So that's what I would count as the outer's perspective. So to put this in, like, I guess, a better context or an example, say if there was a well, let's just go with an easy example. Let's say there's a celebrity, someone who's garnered mass fame in the media and just on a societal level, depending on their country or even across the world. So, okay, I don't know why I put this down. Okay, this is the celebrity, this is the choice they make, and this choice affects their record. Let's say it's a record label, like in the music industry, record producer. This affects their livelihood, and it also affects their immediate family members who are with them wherever they are. And well, let's give a more specific example. Let's say the celebrity, they did a sponsorship deal with a company that was revealed to be a part of a child smuggling ring. Let's go with that. So their choice to be involved with that sponsorship deal, knowingly or unknowingly, you can pick, it affects their well, their business reputation. This affects their record label, the record label that's producing for them. It affects their immediate family. They're in distress about it. They don't know how this could have happened, or if they willingly chose to, why they would have done a deal with a corporation that is actively involved with child smuggling, and it causes mass distress. The record producer is thinking of dropping them completely. So that's the first interpersonal effects here. Getting out into the second ripple of secondary immediate reactions on an interpersonal basis, this is how their acquainted singer-songwriters start viewing them. They are in disbelief of what happened. They don't know what to make of it, and it also starts affecting their well, writing credits and involvement in just everyday well, involvements in music production within this circle of, well, business, in terms of the if it's the same, I don't know, the same record producer in this area involved with them. So that's what it starts affecting here. Then getting out into the societal portion of the first-hand reactions, the external. This is basically what can I technically say for this? Technically this would be how it across the board starts getting portrayed in the news media, and starts affecting their entire career in terms of even getting deals with other record labels, or other record labels start saying that they will not, they won't actively take on this artist if they ask to be taken on, or they try and sign up with them. That's this ripple. And then getting out into the, well, secondary external. This would be basically any stores, like music CD or just or music streaming platforms that start refusing to play their music. They start discontinuing any CDs sold by them, or in terms of streaming services, they bar their music from being streamed on it. They don't actually put it in as a feature to the actual service or a song that's available on it. So that's the fourth ripple of the external factor. And then getting out to here on the outer perspective, all the way away from all this, this is say there's someone who goes to a record store, let's say, and they're with a friend, and they are just having a casual conversation, and they pass by this store, just so happens to still be selling this artist's work in terms of the records, and the people in this outer perspective pass by it, and one of them says, "Oh wow, I didn't expect them to actually still be selling that." And the other one's, "Why?" And they explain, "Well, I heard about how they were involved with some, I don't know, some child smuggling ring or something." And they're like, "Oh, damn, I didn't know that." And then the conversation just moves on. That is the outer perspective here of just how this artist's decision impacted all the way over here, just in the smallest possible ways, got these people thinking about what they did in some fashion, and it basically just trickled all the way down to here in terms of information spreading. So basically that's the outer's perspective as far as I'm concerned. And I genuinely feel that this diagram here is a very good way, and I've used it a lot. I've used it myself, and I've used it in its pseudo form before I actually made this, just with the idea of the ripple effect, like in my head, of the pre-existing ripple effect. But once I started actually cultivating this more, I've been using this method a whole lot more to actually orient my moral choices of what I choose to do, because it has a mass effect. Every choice you make has a mass effect across the board, whether you realize it or not. It might seem like things are just locked, which they're not, but it might seem like to some people that things are locked within their interpersonal lives. Not in the slightest. We all have an effect on one another, directly or indirectly, as well demonstrated here. So yeah, the ripple perspective, I genuinely feel that's not much more that needs explaining here. It's just adapted from the ripple effect, and it's more of just a thought experiment for people to use to actually orient their ethical choices. And I'm sure that you can tell that with the silver pen I was using, it was starting to run out of ink. But whatever. It's the sloppiest diagram I think I've made out of all these. But anyway. Another thought experiment, the life story perspective, philosophy, epistemology/phenomenology. Gotcha. Note, this proposed hypothesis serves, moreover, as a thought experiment to hopefully help aid in psychological empathy/sympathy and emotional connectivity teaching to those who have developed heavy-leaning traits of a personality disorder and or a behavioral disorder, or full-formed psychopathic personality disorder, sociopathy/psychopathy, egotistical personality disorder, egocentrism, Machiavellian personality disorder, independent personality disorder, catatonic personality disorder, avoidant personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, dismissive behavioral disorder, domineering behavioral disorder, or kleptomania. I submit the following conclusion, that an effective method for attempting to increase compassion and understanding for another person's perspective, an individual should imagine their own life as a story in continuous production development, with themselves playing the role of the protagonist, not in the same sense as the delusional symptom of protagonist syndrome, often in association with egotism and narcissism. They're the driving force behind the plot of their moral actions and chosen philosophies. In said individual's life story, anyone within their close interpersonal relationships is a predominant main character. Anyone who is not directly involved with an individual's life is a side character. Anyone who has no immediate connection to the individual, but they pass on a single occasion out in the world, is an extra. And anyone who disrupts the individual's philosophical way of life, thus causing disruption to their meaning, control, understanding, uniqueness, and familiarity, is an antagonist. Now, in order for this theory to work, an individual must then place this cognitive thought process onto the lives of others and determine what role they play in those people's life stories. So, to elaborate on that, I feel that this thought experiment, as I said, can help with actually cultivating emotional empathy and connection towards people. So basically, when you're placing your life into the realm of as if it's a crafted story, you're the main protagonist from your own perspective. You can only know, as of the technology we have right now, you can only know the world through your own eyes and your own, cognitive perception of things, your own assumptions, your own preconceived notions, your own analysis. That's all you can know it from. So in doing that, you are, from your first person perspective, the protagonist of your world. Well, the world we share, but from your perspective, the world. And an accompaniment with this, anyone who is within your immediate inner relationships, those are the people who play a daily role in your constant routines. They're the main characters, or they're the central main characters. And then anyone who's just a well enough acquainted person who doesn't play a completely large role in all of your immediate daily choices is a side character. They come and go into your field of perspective at points, maybe weekly, monthly, sporadically throughout your life. They just come and go. They're here and there, and they have an effect in your interpersonal life, but it's not near to the extent as the main characters of your life, which are the constant, groups you keep around you. Then anyone who is just a passerby to you, basically, who you never directly get to know, you never immediately they never become integrated into your interpersonal life. They're part of the external factor of society. They are the extras of the scenes that you're in. They're the they're the stand-in, basically the walk-on stand-in characters that are just in the background. They come and go. And then, whether in terms of the antagonist portion for this thought experiment, this can really actually technically fit into any category, whether it be people who would be considered main characters, side characters, or even extras. Just anyone who actively, purposefully, or even technically, unintentionally, but to a severe extent, causes disrupt to your desired goals and achievements in life for your 5 subconscious desires. Basically, trying to their own subconscious desires are in conflict with yours, and this creates a dilemma for you, and this basically puts them into the position of the antagonist to your life story. They are the foe that's either something you have to overcome or someone you have to get around, or I don't want to say defeat because I don't believe in defeating someone technically. It's they're an obstacle you have to work around or work through, basically. So, and they can serve as technically as a turning point, I guess, in someone's perspective, just the same as all the other sectors of, well, one's life, main character, other characters that come into the stage of a person's life, main character, side character, or extra, could serve some, well, major prevalence. But now, as stated in the writing I have here, the interesting part is you then have to, for this to work, as I said, for this theory to work, you can't just solely cognitively only look at the world from the perspective of, you can't solely just think, okay, I'm the protagonist, these people are just my surrounding cast, basically, in the story that's being crafted. Now, you, in terms of gaining a healthy perspective from to try and gain better understanding of other people, you have to observe and examine others around you, their lives, or people you pass just on the daily, and you have to actually actively think, okay, well, so who am I in their story? Who am I in their life? Am I a side character? Am I a main character that's a part of it? Am I just an extra that's passing through the scene? Or am I an active foe to their wants and desires? Am I an antagonist? And you will, I guarantee you, just on as stated, on an ontological level of this, if I had it, well, it's epistemology and phenomenology, because I do believe this is a phenomena that happens, in essence, happens all the time, not people actually looking at the world in this way, but just in order of existence. But in ontology as well, just how it exists in nature, this phenomenon, well, basically, you will absolutely be one of these categories to another person. It doesn't even matter if they know you or not, or have any knowledge as to who you are as a person, or that you even exist. You will be in your life, you'll be a protagonist to your own story, and only your own story. You're not a protagonist to anyone else's story, because it's your perspective and their perspective. But you will be, to someone else, you will absolutely be either a central main character, a side character, a passing extra, or a antagonist. You will be a formidable foe to someone. You absolutely will be all 4 of those. And, well, that's just how it exists ontologically. So I intend that as a thought experiment to help people, much like the ripple perspective. In fact, actually, I'd say the life story perspective and the ripple perspective can both be used interchangeably with one another, and or in conjunction with one another. So, yeah, okay, that's that one. The paradox of personal responsibility in Objectivism, philosophy, ontology. Note, this proposed hypothesis is in no way a defense of Ayn Rand or her philosophy of Objectivism. However, I do not want to generalize those who hold objectivist beliefs based solely upon philosophical identity. Currently, as far as I'm concerned, it's an abhorrent philosophy and is nothing more than economic-centered hedonism with a dash of internalized misogyny and white supremacy, functioning on the basis of detrimental egotistic and psychopathic personality tendencies and dismissive behavioral tendencies. I consider Rand herself to have been an internally depressed, racist, sociopathic, egocentric narcissist who only pushed her way into mass favorable public opinion by kissing up to ultra-capitalist Wall Street dictators and appealing to our inherent desire for individual control over the forces of life. She needed serious psychological help, and sadly, I don't think she ever got it. And I mean that sincerely about Ayn Rand. Oh, and as for the internalized bit there, I meant the misogyny, not the white supremacy. That was not internalized. I submit the following conclusion, that the core philosophic principle of objectivism, that it is an individual's own personal responsibility to pave their way up the social ladder of class hierarchy in a free market capitalist economic system and strive to obtain their self-worth through the process of earning financial compensation for hard-tiring labor is not only a disruptive value, but is also completely paradoxical based on what it actually dictates. So, I've talked about objectivism here and there before. What it stipulates is basically, in a capitalist free market economic system, a individual has the own personal responsibility to garner their own worthiness amongst the members of a community by striving through economic freedom, making their own profit their own way through their own labor, through their own business ventures, solo and free of restriction, because it correlates with libertarianism and specifically libertarian capitalism, free of mass government control, with mainly the slightest, from what in terms of Rand's, beliefs, the only slightest amount of interference potentially from governmental force, but pretty well for a complete deregulation of of economic controlled, market. But the main principle, what I was relating to here, is that of her ideal of personal responsibility for consequences that, say, an employee or someone in a business market whose, financial situation is completely collapsed because of the hierarchical system, or their business is not near as successful as, say, a mass corporate entity, it's their personal responsibility to do what they can to actually incentivize people to participate in the free market trade in some way, or incentivize people to actually, in terms of earning wage under the employment of someone, basically incentivize them to give you a promotion in some sense. This, I think, is completely not only ludicrous and it's completely cruel, but it's a paradox. It doesn't make sense really by what she dictates in her philosophy, because of the fact that, let's look at what is personal responsibility. Personal responsibility is taking, well, accountability for your actions, for what you choose to do and what you have done in the past. What you're taking responsibility for things that are a part of you or that you are basically choosing to enact, or that you at the very least had some involvement in enacting. Well, based on this notion, in terms of a, well, free market economic system that allows for privatization of actual, well, self-governing, basically, corporations, and, well, at setting of one's own financial prices, if a trade currency is set up to negotiate resource redistribution, well, then it is their personal responsibility. If someone has started a business and they have employees who work under that business, well, then by the notion of someone taking responsibility for their own actions or for their own, say, belongings, which it could apply to, well, the employees are working under their business, their corporation. They're working under the policies that they have set up and the standards that are supposed to be met by them, that they have tailored their entire, well, fleet of staff to orient themselves around. So, because it's their doing their actions, it's their choice whether they actually redistribute their own wealth and actually fairly try and compensate the workers under them. Well, it's their choice to do so. And if employees are actually not able to make a sustainable living under the capitalist system we have of complete hierarchy from mass corporate entities, or just in any capitalist system in the slightest, or fascist system in the slightest, well, then it is the employer's responsibility, personal responsibility for their employees. It's their personal responsibility for the business that they have set up, including those working under said business, because they are, by all definitions, if you're going with the, well, authoritarian outlook on it, your workers. If I'm not condoning that, but if you're going with that outlook in this, well, ultra-capitalist, objectivist sense. So, this is paradoxical. If you are making the choice to do so in a financial market that is complete free range and allows for those who own said corporations, who set the policies, who actually, well, control all executive decision, well, then it's completely their responsibility as to how the workers are actually able to make a sustainable living in the external society around them, because they're the ones setting the wages. They're the ones who are actually in control of what is redistributed amongst their financial wealth, what we use to negotiate resources. The trade currency is what we use. Or even if there wasn't a trade currency, whatever was used as, say, wage to negotiate resources, it is still their responsibility for it. Now, it would be the employee's personal responsibility if they put up with your atrocious work ethic. Yes, that would be their personal responsibility. And yes, it would be their personal responsibility if they didn't choose to, say, so-called go look for another job, or just quit the job and give up, which is not giving up. But that being said, it's still the corporate head's personal responsibility that they decided to quit in the first. It's their responsibility for the factors that caused them to quit in the first place. So, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, this idea of personal responsibility under objectivist philosophy is complete backwards nonsense. It's completely paradoxical, and it has no real validity to it. It sounds so-called correct on the surface until you start to realize who actually controls the redistribution of a trade currency in a free market setting. So, no, it doesn't work. It's still your personal responsibility to take care of your employees under your corporation in a society that is completely dominated by total reign of privatization and amalgamation of wealth. So it's their personal responsibility that, well, for objectivists who are also elitists right now, part of the elite core of the world, well, it's their personal responsibility that the world is in the hellhole that it is. So there you go. Because they actively lobby and also select mass influence over governments just to create laws that benefit their own corporate motives. Okay. This one way that I can prove this theory is the fact that this one that I've written out here has actually helped me with my dissociation. I suffer from somatoform dissociation, part of my psychosomatic illness, and either it has worked as a damn good placebo effect, or genuinely because of my knowledge as my now gained insight after further thinking about this theory and writing it out, what I have of it so far, it's actually remitted my symptoms almost completely. I have not felt dissociated for many, many weeks now. But nonetheless, let me explain. Mental dissociation as a result of parasympathetic, amygdal, and temporal malfunction from perceived environmental threats. Psychopathology / neuropsychology / psychoanalysis. Note, this is one explanation as to why disorders characterized under the psychiatric phenomenon of dissociation develop / persist within a person, and is by no means the wholly definitive criteria for each individual's prognosis and diagnosis, as there is provably other conscious and subconscious factors attributed to interpersonal and societal factors as to why they can form. However, I do believe that this hypothesis' reasoning is the cause for a majority of cases globally and should be continuously considered when undergoing psychological evaluation and treatment of a patient, along with this by no means being an excuse for ableism and belittlement directed towards those suffering from these illnesses. As far as I'm concerned, believing that people affected by them innately can't change, or can't at the very least try mitigating problems caused by them, is ableist prejudice. I submit the following conclusion, that a large portion of the human population who suffer from dissociative mental disorders, including generalized dissociation, atypical dissociation, derealization, depersonalization, depersonalization disorder, DDD, somatoform dissociation, dissociative identity disorder, DID, absorption, and dissociative amnesia, have gained such psychological illnesses from a gradual reactionary uptick in stimulatory activity of the parasympathetic nervous system, a branch of the peripheral nervous system, and the amygdala, a neural cluster deep within the limbic system, as well as a heightened production of the neurochemical dopamine beginning to transmit to neuronuclei within the temporal lobe, the lower lateral portion of the cerebral cortex's right and left hemispheres, attributed to the onset and continued reaffirmation of factors within different individuals' social environmental surroundings that consciously and or subconsciously their emotional states perceive as being a present danger to their 5 inherent subconscious desires for meaning, control, understanding, uniqueness, and familiarity, most often presenting said alternations to cognitive perception with neurologic symptoms such as memory issues, blurred long-term memory recall, mental fatigue, brain fog, impaired critical thinking skills, absent seizures, 15 to 20 second staring spells, depth perception problems, spatial awareness problems, and psychiatric symptoms such as indecisiveness, emotional blunting, emotional detachment, irritability, and anhedonia, lack of joyfulness and pleasure. From what I've observed, this repetitive occurrence of overstimulation to the aforementioned neurological regions typically begins in early adolescence, mid to late childhood, with the full-blown integration of dissociation also becoming an apparent sensation within an individual's consciousness around the same stage of development at slightly later maturity, early to mid-teenhood, with disturbances to processing/retrieval of memory and analytical/critical thought happening within this same time frame. As for specification to what could be considered common traumatizing external stimuli associated with linkable disruptive interpersonal and societal factors, I currently don't have any certainty to. From what I can tell, it's completely varied between people and made even harder to distinguish. It's made even hard to distinguish a noticeable thematic environmental traumatizer, given the fact that most dissociative disorders tend to develop in comorbidity with other more readily apparent psychological illnesses, such as the mental disorders of depression, psychosis, and paranoia, and the personality disorders of egotistical personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, sociopathy/psychopathy, schizoid personality disorder, and catatonic personality disorder. So the best possible citations I could give would be any of my other proposed theories pertaining to the formation of different psychiatric disorders. However, in terms of the specifications of the neuroreactionary development of mental dissociation, I will demonstrate my findings in the following provided example scenario. For the purposes of simplification, let's say a child, and I didn't get to writing the rest of that, but I guess I'll just craft it up here. So let's say there's a child who's 4 or 5. They live, and for the simplification part, they live in a very physically abusive household. They are constantly beaten by their parental figures and also verbally abused. Well, when this first begins, let's say it began when they were 3. They were getting slapped and they were getting verbally berated. Well, at this point, the nervous system, because it's not meant to constantly be reacting to fearfulness, as that is part of, as far as I'm concerned, biologic thanatophobia. That was the wrong one there. It's basically, well, it's constant at this early age. The physical abuse and verbal abuse is a constant disrupt to their 5 inherent desires. And this causes the parasympathetic nervous system from being triggered by the emotional state. This causes it to ever so gradually gain a constant uptick in, reaction to just stimuli that normally, in a normal, healthy nervous system, would not be so reactionary, to in major ways or even at all in a healthy social environment. It would not have any sort of uptick in activity for its constant stimulation. Now, it's worthy to mention here that what's so special about the parasympathetic nervous system and the amygdala in the limbic system is that the amygdala controls our anxiety responses. It controls fearfulness, stress. It's majorly involved in the production of cortisol, the stress, often referred to as the stress hormone, and also as well as brain production of adrenaline, releasing of adrenaline into the actual nervous system. So, and as part of the peripheral nervous system for motor sensory responses, the parasympathetic nervous system is basically what controls our flinching reactions, or physical shock in any sort of way, or also our agility, our quick time reactions and agility to something that surprises us or we see or sense as being a potential physically harming threat, and will enable us to move out of the way of said oncoming threat. So that's the role of the amygdala and the parasympathetic nervous system, which the amygdala is the header of the parasympathetic nervous system. So in the event of the child that is constantly being abused, the parasympathetic nervous system and the amygdala, in terms of neuroplasticity and to some degree, or the adaptation of neurons, how they become, because we know that neurons in the neural cortexes become adapted to environmental stimuli. They adapt to, orient their control and their reactions from external stimuli to a given environment. And basically, that hurt my lip. Basically, over a long duration time of this child being abused, their parasympathetic nervous system and amygdala starts reacting to stimuli of the external world that would not normally, in a healthy human being, it would not be reacting to. It would not be having any sort of major stimulation occurring in its neuronuclei, in the amygdala or along in the parasympathetic nervous system. And after a while, this becomes a constant, even when the abuse is not, readily there. It becomes a constant. The parasympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system and the amygdala have now become adapted to things that it may perceive in the environmental surroundings as a potential threat. And because of this, after a while, as far as from what I've observed, as happening usually in early to mid-teenhood by this point, the temporal lobe along here of, sides of the cranium, of the cerebrum, will start to see an uptick in dopamine. Now, I make note here that the temporal lobe is very important in the development of dissociation, because the temporal lobe is the main control center for focus and attention and concentration, along with also the prefrontal cortex playing a part in focus as well as the fact of critical thought and memory storage. So basically, though, after a while, the constant overstimulation of the parasympathetic and the amygdala will cause the temporal lobe to begin to react. And basically, because of this newfound constant reactions from the temporal lobe, an uptick in dopamine starts to flood its way to the actual brain region, which as far as I'm concerned, because it's the header, for the most part, of focus and attention, from what I'm trying to get at with this theory is dissociation, basically, from what I believe, is actually an attempt by the temporal lobe to divert focus away from the given scenario that a person finds themselves in after the constant years of overstimulation to the amygdala and the parasympathetic nervous system. So in this sense, dissociation is technically an attention deficit disorder. And how I can further prove this is by looking at the fact that in terms of the neurological symptoms that dissociation can cause in terms of memory problems, or if it's severe enough, full-on memory loss, where this can come to play here is that we know that the temporal occipital region, the back region connecting the occipital lobe to the temporal lobe, and also in the region around the parietal lobe, the lower, in the region of the inferior, I would say, the inferior occipital and the, I guess technically, I don't know what the back end of the region of the temporal lobe is called. Maybe that upper portion is superior. The back end area of the temporal lobe and its connection to the inferior occipital lobe, we know has a correlation with integration of memory regulation. And, excuse me, this memory regulation helps actually encode memories. It helps encode information for our hippocampuses within the limbic system to process, so that information that we have retrieved throughout the day in whatever form, visual, audio, even nasal in terms of smell, I guess technically touch as well. Yeah, touch has control from the pons. But anyway, it helps it's vital in encoding memories for the hippocampus to process, which can then be processed to the prefrontal cortex in the upper cerebral region for permanent memory storage, for long-term memory recall, and for working memory. And we know that in this process as well, how we can examine that with the temporal lobe, that dreaming, it's been long theorized that dreams actually, and it's not concretely proven, but there's heavy evidence towards it, and I am very much more in favor of that theory, that dreams neuropsychologically help actually is part of the encoding process within the temporal occipital region. It's part of it to help actually relay information that we have visually, and if we can hear sounds in our dreams, audibly, what we've audibly heard throughout the day, to help our hippocampuses better translate the actual information to our prefrontal cortexes. Now, with that knowledge, going back to dissociation and the uptick in dopamine in the temporal lobe, how this relates to it is, if that is true about the encoding of memories with the inferior occipital lobe region and the back end of the temporal lobe for the encoding of memories, this further helps my theory that that dissociation is an attempt by the temporal lobe, after an uptick in dopamine has happened, to displace attention from a current situation that we're in, because we know of the effects that dissociation has on cognitive memory process. we know that it can cause very harsh blurred memory and very, very much difficulty in just general, in long-term, not short-term most often, but long-term memory recall, with most patients often describing it as blurred or blackened in their mind and not actually able to visually picture, well, that'd be aphantasia, but not being able to actually fully grasp a memory from even so much as 30 minutes ago, long-term memory recall, and even sometimes could have trouble in terms of working memory at a certain moment in a sort of almost similar to ADHD, like what they call an oh my excuse me. Okay. So back to talking about memories. Okay, so what is called an ADHD, I believe it's called ADHD freeze, mental freeze, where a ADHD patient becomes so, in terms of external stimuli, overly stimulated that they can't keep up. Their focus has been so incredibly disrupted that they just they stop basically in their tracks with whatever thought process they had or what they were doing. Their behavior, it ceases for a minute, and it's often accompanied by mass agitation and a lot of anger or very much frustration. But anyway, in this similar sense, ow, my throat. In this similar sense, dissociation, we know that it causes these memory issues. And if this is true about what I'm proposing about the overstimulation of parasympathetic and amygdala, which leads to an uptick in dopamine rushing to the temporal lobe, this would easily, I think, affect the encoding process of memories in the occipital and back half temporal region, which would explain the long-term memory recall problems for if information was disrupted for being relayed to the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. So there's that. And why I specifically why I'm specifically stating that dissociation is an attempt by the temporal lobe to divert your focus away from a given scenario. Basically, I mean, what happens, I feel, in terms of the psychological elements here of a conscious and or subconscious integration of this, is that after constant stimulation has occurred to the para and the amygdala, a patient becomes, most often I would say, subconsciously aware of the fact that, their unconscious becomes aware of the fact that they feel from their gained subconscious perception that they can't escape the given troubling scenario that they're in. They feel entrapped by it interpersonally. They feel that they have no alternative routes of actually escape. Even if they left, say, a household that they were in, they felt like they couldn't run away or go to another person for help, and they eventually will return to the home. They feel as if there is no actual escape from this. Or from a societal, from the further influence of societal factors on their interpersonal lives, if they see this constant, similar lifestyle that's being played out, this unhealthy lifestyle that's within their interpersonal life, affecting a large whole of society on a large scale of multiple different families and communities as a whole in some facet, which is absolutely true in my opinion, then this can also cause further integration psychologically of this perception shift. And so after this overstimulation has occurred, this I'll get on that in a second, actually. Hold on. This perception shift causes... I feel it's what actually causes, because of the overstimulation to those other regions, the uptick in dopamine in the first place, so that the temporal region actually has enough, enough chemical functionality to problematically, ineffectively divert a person's focus, attempt to divert a person's focus away from the scenario that they're in, because they know that, or they feel that they know, again, consciously or subconsciously, but most often subconsciously, that they feel that they can't escape this. And another way I can prove this theory is the fact that we know that the frontotemporal region, the region of the frontal cortex that's, as well as the bulge that's right to the front of the temporal region, is incredibly crucial in self-perception, in perception and interpretation of, different environmental stimuli, as well as that of the prefrontal cortex in terms of critical thought process, as mentioned before, and analysis. So it's crucial in the formation of our perceptions. So all that combined, I would say that this is a good enough proof of the fact that that dissociation is not just, as stated in the title of it, it is an attempt to absolve itself of the environmental factors to it because of parasympathetic and amygdala malfunction and temporal malfunction. But it's, in relation to the temporal lobe, it's quite literally an attention deficit. It's basically an attempt by the brain to, specifically the neuropsychological state, to divert your attention divert it away from the disruption to your 5 inherent human desires, to an individual's 5 subconscious desires, divert it away from the disruption and conflict that is causing the apathy. And in terms of the 5 inherent human desires, I believe that dissociation is related to the apathetic response. All out. And I wholeheartedly believe that theory and all the other theories I mentioned in this video so far. The Paradox of Anti-Moralism, Philosophy, Ontology/Ethics. Oh God, my throat. I submit the following conclusion, that the philosophical belief of anti-moralism is not only by its own principles of dictation problematically paradoxical, but also does not even in and of itself truly exist based upon its very ontological nature. I'll define the meaning of the term morality and outline the study of ethics within the realms of philosophy, both in essence of the scientific field's existence and what I and other researchers collectively agree to be its axiological value to help further prove this theory. Definition of morality/ethics. Principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong, or beneficial and detrimental behavior. A particular system of values and principles of conduct, especially one held by a specified person or society. The extent to which an action is right or wrong, moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity, the branch of knowledge that deals with moral principles. Ethical philosophy is any form of examination and or communicative discourse that encompasses questions, dilemmas, and supposed answers regarding what is believed to be righteous in response to a situation, virtue, wrongful in response to a situation, vice, or undetermined/disputed area of reaction to a situation. In regards to innate unassigned purpose and worth, it's a human conceived construct that is used to bring an understanding to our own nominal biological and irregular disorderly social functions of what is more helpful or harmful for us to act upon in given scenarios. By this understanding, we know that morality is therefore... Okay, I'll continue on from that. Okay, by all that understanding, we know that morality is what people intrinsically hold as being, well, a proper means of orienting one's social behavior. How morality works is basically the fact of you have a feeling that something is, say, right to engage in. It's beneficial, it's helpful to people, and it is overall just a better thing to do. And you think that people overall, and yourself, should be engaging in it. Well, that's immoral. Same as vice versa if you thought it was detrimental and people should not be engaging in it. Well, here's the thing. The reason that I really absolutely hate anti-moralism and why I do not believe that it even exists in the slightest is because of the fact that in order to be anti-moral, you quite literally would not have to assert any sort of righteousness over something. That includes giving advice to people, saying that you should do this, you should do that, you should be engaging in this. No, I don't, or no, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's right. No, that doesn't seem exactly right. I don't agree with doing that. That's immoral. That's your intrinsic feeling of what is, well, maybe I shouldn't say it's not intrinsic. It's your feeling of, it's your gained sense of what you feel to be more beneficial to do in a given scenario. And by this notion, being anti-moral or being an anti-moralist is well, completely non-existent, given the fact that, okay, let's say, let's use the actual philosophy of, well, anti-moralism. I'll prove how it's paradoxical here. So, you're an anti-moralist. You believe that my morals are my morals, and I will not dictate your choice. I don't believe that anyone should dictate anyone else's choice of morality, anyone's ethical choice. It's their right to do what they want, and I will not intervene in it whatsoever. Sounds great on the surface, right? Sounds very anarchistic, or libertarian in a sense. Sounds very liberating, right? Well, then you actually look at the fact that they are asserting a stance of some kind of what they feel to be wrong and what they feel to be righteous. Well, that's immoral. And basically, so you don't feel that anyone should be projecting or should be enforcing their morality onto you. Well, that's you. If you're telling somebody this and you wholeheartedly, or not telling anyone, you believe that this is how humanity should be, well, you are projecting a moral onto humanity there. You are asserting the fact that you think that people should not dictate someone else's morals, that you should just be kept to your own devices, and think that it is wrong for people to assert a moral high ground. Well, that's a moral high ground in and of itself. Basically, believing this hold on, let me gather my thoughts. Okay, got it back on track. So not only is this idea of you saying that you shouldn't be projecting your morals onto anyone else, or in enforcing morality on someone else, well, you asserting that is immoral in and of itself, thus not only making you a complete hypocrite to your ideals. By this notion, it creates a paradox, as being anti-moral or being anti-moralist is inherently moralist. It creates a complete paradox where you are now asserting that this is a proper way for humanity to actually, well, be functioning. So that's absolutely immoral. That's being, well, put forth onto other people. And you can't escape that. I don't think there's any way to escape that. I think that anti-moralism just simply does not exist in the slightest. Everyone is a moralist. Everyone has their ideals of what they feel is more beneficial for people to do, what you feel is right or wrong to do. By this notion, you cannot be anti-moralist. You can't. It's literally impossible, and as far as I'm concerned, paradoxical. So, yeah. Oh, yes, this one has the other diagram. This is the second to last diagram I made in regards to all these theories. The inevitable formation of culture from ideology. Philosophy, ontology/phenomenology/ideology. I submit the following conclusion, that by their ontological and phenomenological nature, human concocted ideological/philosophical beliefs in regards to how an individual person or a collective demographic of people should socially behave within or outside the confines of a societal structuring in an anarchistic sense, not only have the intrinsic components to craft traditional practices and methods of enacting them and celebratory customs in accordance with those methods succeeding, but will inevitably formulate a cultural identity around their moral principles and systems of operation amongst groups that affiliate and adhere to them. I've come to the notions of much of this theory's reasoning from reflecting upon many of my own exchanges/debates and outright arguments with people amongst my interpersonal relationship circles, particularly in relation to group activities conducted and practiced by said individuals. To define the specific terminology used here, ideology, a system of ideas and ideals, especially one which forms the basis of economic or political theory and policy, the ideas and manner of thinking characteristics of a group, social class, or individual, a set of opinions or beliefs of a group or an individual, very often referring to a set of political beliefs or a set of ideas that characterize a particular culture, a form of social or political philosophy in which practical elements are as predominant as theoretical ones. Philosophy, the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline, a particular system of philosophical thought, the study of the theoretical basis of a particular branch of knowledge or experience, a theory or attitude held by a person or organization that acts as a guiding principle for behavior. Culture, the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group, all the ways of life, including arts, beliefs. Why do I keep putting that over there? All these pages. Including arts, beliefs, and institutions of a population that are passed down from generation to generation, the behaviors, beliefs, values, and symbols that they accept, generally without thinking about them, and that are passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next, an umbrella term which encompasses the social behavior, institutions, and norms found in human societies, as well as the knowledge, beliefs, arts, laws, customs, capabilities, and habits of the individuals in these groups, often originating from or attributed to a specific region or location. Most often when examining the basic foundations of which an ideological belief and social adherence is rooted in, it's traceable to find that they have typically formed out of traditional practices, spiritualities, and normative attitudes localized to specific demographics of people that have developed over millennia of psychobiological and sociobiological evolution. This is what a human culture is in essence, which when put under the lens of collectivist thought could be considered an ideology in and of itself. But I feel that what has historically been mainly overlooked is the apparent presence of a distinct separate culture within these different demographics, developing out of the preceding constructed ideology to the prior cultural identity. Though this process is currently and has constantly been a result of psychosociological reactions across the board, across the broad landscape of humanity, predominantly within the realms of political discourse, in my opinion, it is not merely a byproduct of established societal structuring, but also an innate property to the very fundamental existence of ideologic/philosophic beliefs and how they're acted out in our physical and metaphysical livelihoods. I can prove this theory by examining both how the concept of ideological thought exists amongst people as a whole and the inherent components that structure an ideology. When looking at, and I didn't finish it, but I have another diagram for this. So when looking at an ideology, it's clear to see that there are certain patterns that, as far as I'm concerned, in the way that an ideology in terms of activism and advocacy is put into place, there's a lot of themes that start reoccurring. Ow, that hurt. Hair caught in my glasses. There are themes that reoccur, particularly in the fact that of what people basically agree on or practice in terms of how they implement the morals of the ideology. So basically, let's use the most predominant example I can think of. Excuse me. Let's say there is a specific group, an organization that is followers of an ideology, and some of the main principles of dictation are that of standing up to oppressive forces, let's say. And one method that is, decreed in this, or has been universally agreed upon by most who follow the ideology, is that of peaceful protest. Picketing signs outside of the oppressor's, establishments in order to actually get them to adhere to their will. This, in essence, as far as I'm concerned, if done enough and is passed down ideologically from generation to generation of newcomers to the actual organization and just to the ideological belief in and of itself, is in essence a cultural tradition that has formed, out of the ideology and formed in the form of activism and advocacy. So, as far as I'm concerned, activism and advocacy as a whole when put under the dictation of an ideology and constantly practiced, is actually a new cultural tradition in and of itself. Or let's go with another one. Let's say if there was an ideology that was very favorable to free physical expression, and it called for the dictation of complete what's the wording I could use here? Being very vigorous and very passionate with your physical expression. And in taking the moral principles here, if it's taken by a majority of people who follow the ideology in a collectivist sense, in a group setting, and they use people, the demographic mainly engages in wearing a lot of makeup or being very vibrantly dressed in terms of physical colors that they wear on clothes or on their appendages if they get tattoos or things of the sort, or attachments like earrings and things of the sort, or piercings, anything else. Basically, if this is constantly practiced enough within this ideological belief, then it becomes a new cultural tradition, as far as I'm concerned, different and distinct enough from that of what the initial culture that formed the prior ideology out of initially. So basically, well, here, let me just bust out the diagram. God, I'm tired. So this is probably the most simple diagram I actually have overall. Come on, stale. Okay. Give you a minute to just look that over, to pause it. Okay, so basically, where's my trusty pen? You have the initial culture that formed the later ideology. Its traditions, its practices, its initial belief systems, etc. And all of that, and what is projected into the ideology, is its moral principle, and also, in many instances, its methodologic basis. What methods are used to actually enact the policies or wanted desire of the said ideological belief. So, in doing this, though, it doesn't just create an ideology. As far as I'm concerned, once this has formed its own identity, the ideology has formed its own, basis of principles created from the initial moral principles of the culture before, and methods as well on its own, to some degree. Once enacted, this... Stay in, please. Be good now, thank you. Lord. Once actually continuously put into action and enacted by the group of people that adhere to the ideological belief and associate their political identity to the ideology, this then creates the formation of new cultural traditions out of the ideology, which creates a neo-culture, a new culture out of it. And this, in turn, can basically just mutually satisfies. It creates this. I just created this circle pattern. Well, not circle, oval pattern of two checkered arrow lines. Basically, the neo-culture and its principles of action and overall just traditional practices, it mutually satisfies the initial culture that the ideology that formed the neo-culture was formed out of, which then mutually satisfies the neo-culture because, down the line, a ways back, the basic principles that formed the basic principles of the ideology that formed out of the initial culture formed the traditions that would go into creating the neoculture out of the ideology. So basically, like most of my diagrams, to some degree, it all works in a big friggin' circle system or oval system. But so that's the basic gist of it. That, as far as I'm concerned, and not only does it typically do this in terms of what has been observed sociologically, phenomenologically throughout history, it also will, in my opinion, inevitably do this, that any sort of ideology will form a culture out of it, because by its very dictations of wanting to put something into practice and enactment, by whatever group of people follows the said ideology, once enacted enough and actually, well, adhered to some degree, well, that's the formation of a new culture, as these are practices carried out by a group of people and principles that are adhered to, and also are beliefs passed on from generation to generation. So it just, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. It's not just a phenomenon that happens, like just that can happen. It will. And, well, there's nothing you can do about that. It's not a problem as far as I'm concerned, at least as of right now, but that's just, yeah, it's inevitable. You can't have the initial culture that formed the ideology and then form the neoculture out of said principles that were initially a part of the traditional teachings of the original culture. And if this pattern were to be proven true, which I believe it very much is, well, then you can't have the neoculture's traditions and the ideology. Well, you can't have the ideology and the practices of that ideology being put into place without this said new culture forming, if any of that made sense. Okay, yeah. So it's inevitable. One more look at the diagram, if you want to pause it. Okay. Okay, hold on a minute. How many more? Okay, through any more paradoxes that I have in terms of theory, except for the last one I want to bring up, which I don't have any printed off here except for one, which I can't find. But, oh well. Maybe I'll reprint it in the morning if I'm still here. I'm just going to go lightning round on the paradoxes except for the last one. Okay. Parental guardianship. Guidianship. Spelled like, well, as what you'll see on screen. Philosophy, ethics. Note, this proposed hypothesis is by no means an excuse for provably unfounded ageism directed towards children and teenagers, especially in regards to intellectual ageist prejudice, nor is this theory a condonement or an excuse for manipulation of kids and teens for nefarious detrimental purposes. I submit the following conclusion, that the only ethically sound way to maximize assurance that a child will potentially form provably healthy psychological properties, whether in the realms of cognition/intelligence, mentality, personality, behavior, socialization, sexuality/romantic attraction, substance usage, habitual activities, coping mechanisms/personal hobbies, etc. Physiological properties, whether in the realms of body structural physique, weight mass, neurologic function, muscular function. Oh yeah, that's fine. Muscular function, gastrointestinal function / diet, cardiovascular function, immunofunction, osteologic function, sexologic function, etc., and philosophical / ideological outlooks towards life as a whole, whether in the realms of morality, ontologic beliefs, epistemologic beliefs, axiologic beliefs, political identity. Oh, great, my phone's dying. Here, hold on. political identity / affiliation, religious / spiritual beliefs, cultural identity / practices, activism / advocism methods, etc., is through an adult caregiving figure utilizing either anarchistic and or libertarian parental methodology in order to not exert encroaching authority over the adolescent individual's development process, allowing them to explore their own self-interests, critically think about theirs and others' contributions to interpersonal and external social relationships, understand their humanly intrinsic internal loneliness, experiment with sexual and or romantic urges, experience emotional irritation and anger towards things that disrupt their 5 inherent subconscious desires, meaning control, understanding, uniqueness, and familiarity, etc., granting them true liberty for free agency to make choices, whether beneficial or detrimental to their well-being and others, as well as whether in cooperation with or defiance of others, in accordance to what they've concluded at the current point in time to be logically reasonable. What they've concluded to be logically reasonable. From my observations, out of every stage of life in our aging process, childhood and to a certain extent teenhood is easily the point at which we are psychologically the most naturally self-centered, as typically, though not certainly, our compassionate, affectionate, generous, and guilt/apologetic responses to inappropriate mishaps of our own faults, concluded from our own cognitive analysis biases and perceptions, are overshadowed by our relatively newfound senses from our core subconscious desires, consciously realized or not, to obtain meaningfulness for us to reasonably progress towards a fulfilling goal in life, control for us to securely achieve what we view as potentially being fulfilling in life, understanding for ourselves and others we converse with, to have / relate to reasoning behind our motives towards a fulfilling life, uniqueness for us to have gratification and reaffirmation to our egotistic personality characteristics so that we can feel special within a fulfilling life, and familiarity for us to have some semblance of recognizability to needed projections of internal loneliness, interactive loneliness, that can be comforting to our preconceived knowledge within a fulfilling life. And as far as I'm concerned, it is completely normal for children to be behaving in this manner as their psychological state begins its continuing developmental process throughout the duration of their lifespans. So with that being in mind, I feel that this method of parenting is unequivocally imperative for a child's self-growth, and is, despite much of contemporary belief, the safest way emotionally for them to interact with their surrounding environments. It is sadly frequently thought that parental figures are supposed to act as guardians to their offspring and shield them from the potential dangers of the world, often utilizing hierarchical authoritarian tactics to achieve such a goal, commonly with the method that's known as helicopter parenting, so that the child doesn't question what they have perceived to be definitively truthful knowledge, whether out of intentional ignorance or wants out of unintentional ignorance or wants for a subservient kid to solely gratify their own self-interest, thus culminating in a proper integration of youthful social attitudes and morality, that is, ideally. However, we have numerous amounts of research evidence that has shown human beings, based on our initial reactions to the surrounding environments we're placed into after birth as infants, and our early sociocultural, financial, educational, discomforting, etc. exposures, will inevitably not want the concretely same exact stimuli for our subconscious desires. So, to further elaborate on that, based on that notion, as far as I'm concerned, exerting mass authority over your child in the idea that it'll actually keep them much, much, much more dangerous for their psychological health and physiological health in terms of their expression and their exploration of their growing understanding of their subconscious desires. It's far more dangerous. It exerts too much control, and it actually it posits the idea that you know what's best for them, or that you actively know what their, well, how their subconscious desires are going to, well, present themselves, how they're going to manifest, and what they are concretely going to want out of life. I'm going to give you a reality check. You won't. You will not. It doesn't matter if they are your child and they came from your DNA. It does not matter. We have our, I believe everyone has their own, well, it's very varying. It's quite varying, our perceptions and our subconscious desires for life. It's completely, well, sporadic, and it's individual on that sense. It is selfish in that regard, and it's very, very individual. So in this notion, an anarchist lifestyle in terms of parenting, or the very least a libertarian lifestyle with the most basic, least amount of authority enforcement possible, I feel is the definitive way for a parent to actually raise the child to have, not only be self-reliant to a beneficial extent, but also so as to not actively destroy their wants and desires in sacrifice of the parents' own wants and desires. Especially in relation to, unfortunately, because of social traumatization, many parents of the modern day and for many centuries have utilized children basically as a social commodity, as almost a good and service trade for social praise amongst their interpersonal friendships. Basically just to appear as, oh, well, we're getting to the age of where we culturally should be having children. Oh, late 30s, early 40s, around there. Maybe we should have kids. Yeah, let's have kids. Everyone else is having them, so go right ahead. It's this histrionic tendency that develops of a want to, well, appease others, well, gain others' adornment. Or, not adornment, admiration. Gain their admiration. And I think that's a very, very dangerous mindset. And it's very, very, well, destructive to the child's health. So in terms of mitigating the chances of you exacting that much authority, I believe it should be anarchistic or libertarian enactments of your parenting methods. Now, what about, there can be, people probably say, well, what about the dilemmas of this? What about if they were to engage in an inappropriate sexual relation at a young age with an older person, or if they were to walk out into the middle of the road and get hit by a car, or if they were to eat something that they had an allergic reaction to, and we knew that they were going to have an allergic reaction to. Well, as far as I'm concerned, with my personal new found realizations of, well, my own political ideologies of anarcho-communism and, well, just social anarchism, I don't believe that can be controlled at all to any good extent. Do I think that's good that it happens? Absolutely not. I don't think that's beneficial in the slightest. I think that's terrible. All three of those things that I mentioned, and so on and so forth with things similar to it. But as far as I'm concerned, exacting more authority over attempts to try and control potential dangers and threats, we have seen demonstrated wildly in systematic and systemic enforcements how it does not work, and it does not actually resolve the initial reasoning for why something occurred. It just either maybe somewhat gets it away from a certain area or location of people to keep them somewhat safe, but it doesn't actually fully keep them safe, because the sentiment of the, well, whatever assault was being carried out is still there. And also, if someone was to be in a, well, rather, well, undesirable scenario, and something happened and like it fully came to fruition, well, then the damage is already done. Having an exact, like some sort of system control authority after the fact that something has happened, it does nothing as far as I'm concerned. Psychological therapy would help in that regard. I don't believe systems of policing will help in the slightest. I don't believe they're even effective in taking a threat away most often from a given scenario, as most often the reason something became a threat in the first place is because, well, it was enacted in that moment, even if there was maybe a foreshadowing to it. And back to the topic of children, I think it's more likely to induce psychological disorders in them, being overly authoritative and incredibly encroaching to their personal space and their own explorations, than it would be to let them be and let them figure it out. Now, this doesn't mean, obviously, I am not advocating for you to have no connection to your child at all. You absolutely should give them attention and be connected with them and be engaged in their social relationships. But don't dictate what they do with those relationships. Ask them about how they're doing and actually speak to them and actually converse and have compassion and empathy for them and just talk and get to an understanding, but don't control. Don't, if you want to say to them and try and convince them that this isn't, and I don't mean like in a manipulative, coercive way. If you want to try and show them your point of view that you don't think this is a beneficial thing to do or the right thing to do morally, tell them that, plant the seed, mentally plant the seed, and then leave it be. And what happens, happens. As far as I'm concerned, if something terrible happens out of it, then there's nothing more you can do. I think it's far worse for you to try and exert actual authority over them, because you do not know what's best for them. I'm sorry to tell you, but you don't. Too many people in this world get far too up in their egos and think that they actually know what's best for, especially parents. Far too many parents get way too egotistical and very much narcissistic in thinking that they know what is best for the child because they came from a part of them. No, they don't. That's not how actual biology works. That's not how human nature works. Again, I'm going to go back to it. Keep going back to it. I think you can tell from my diagram of the 5 inherent human desires and in interactive loneliness, biologic thanatophobia, our pro-socialization, it's all goddamn confusing. It's a completely, very, well, incredibly confusing and complex system, our psychological state and our psychobiology. So, no, I do not condone authority over children at all, over anyone, to a large extent. So I am for what, and in terms of why I called it parental guidianship, is that I feel your parental method should function more as your child is here, you're here, they're acting a certain way, and they may be confused. You do not act as a grabbing hand that grabs their body and just guides them towards the proper way. You act as a outstretched hand, and you just walk along beside them. That's it. And you keep that hand out offered for them to take your hand. This is metaphorically speaking. Take your hand when they so choose to and when they feel like it. And you also don't dictate when they let go of your hand. You don't. And because there's a lot of people, unfortunately, certain cultural elements as well, the idea that, in tough love, you don't dictate the choices, but you're going to let go of their hand eventually. No, as far as I'm concerned with this method of parental guardianship, you don't let go of their hand. Metaphorically, you just keep it outstretched, and when they want to let go, they let go. And when they want to come back to it, they come back to it. And then the process would repeat one day if they were to become parents as well. So basically, you just act as a guiding force, an actual guiding force, not the performative what is constant in so much of the mass media of, we need to guide our children, we need to be role models for them, we need to be constantly attentive to their needs, we need to be just shaping the world to make a better tomorrow, all this fucking idiotic performative bullshit that's completely mass histrionic personality. It's mass histrionic personality disorder. It's complete, it's a photo op most of the time. Or they've been indoctrinated into that belief that that would actually be helpful, which is not true in the slightest. An actual guiding force of just acting as a figure that walks along beside them through life, metaphorically, and just leaves a hand outstretched. And that's it. And you don't dictate when they grab it, and you don't dictate when they let go of it. You just let them be. And in that regard, a process, as far as I'm concerned, now I emphasize potentially in the writing there, because it's not guaranteed that a beneficial outcome will come out of it, as is with everything. But I think it is the most maximal way to ensure, in an ethical way, that beneficial outcome will happen for the child's psychological, physiological, and philosophical well-being. So, yeah, that's my theory of parental guardianship. I am going to stop this part here and get water, because I'm thirsty. My throat is dry. I'd probably get something to eat. I don't know if I'm going to be up all night. I maybe very early in the morning I'll sleep for like an hour or two, but once I get on the road to Quebec, damn well wherever I set up my tent, I will crash immediately. But yeah, hopefully in the next video I can wrap up all of these. Maybe I'll go a little faster with my explanations if I can. Okay, stay tuned for the next one.